My fingers slipped over the brass button for a second before it clicked into place. The dress uniform fit exactly the way it was supposed to. The dark wool jacket sat stiff against my shoulders. The brass insignia reflected the chandelier light from above. Everything looked clean, polished, and ceremonial. My hands didn't belong in the picture. Tiny white scars crossed my knuckles and fingertips. Most people never noticed them unless they looked closely. They came from years of handling damaged wires, burned insulation, sharp fragments, and equipment that never cared how careful you were. The white gloves waiting on the marble counter looked ridiculous next to them. I stared at my reflection in the gold-framed mirror and laughed once under my breath. Not because anything was funny. Because somewhere in the Department of Defense, somebody had decided that an EOD technician should spend her evening in a ballroom instead of crawling through dirt. Life had a strange sense of humor. I picked up the gloves and slid them on. The scars disappeared, at least visually. Nothing else ever made them disappear. For 12 years, I had worked as an explosive ordnance disposal technician attached to a joint task force. Most people heard the title and imagined action movies. The reality was much quieter. Hours of waiting, minutes of careful movement, seconds that could change everything. You learned to control your breathing. You learned to trust procedures. You learned that panic never solved a problem and usually created a bigger one. Most importantly, you learned that nobody cared how brave you looked. The bomb either came apart correctly or it didn't. The wire either belonged there or it didn't. Reality was brutally simple. People were not. A burst of laughter echoed through the foyer outside the dressing room. I stepped into the hallway and immediately regretted it. The British Embassy in Washington looked like somebody had handed an unlimited budget to a committee that loved crystal and gold. Massive chandeliers hung overhead. Marble floors reflected every light. Diplomats moved through the crowd, holding glasses that probably cost more than my first car payment. Military officers stood beside politicians. Foreign dignitaries exchanged handshakes. Everywhere I looked, people seemed completely comfortable being seen. I hated it. Put me in a bomb suit carrying 70 pounds of equipment across uneven terrain, and I was fine. Put me in a room full of cameras and donors, and I wanted to disappear. Unfortunately, disappearing wasn't an option tonight. The invitation had not really been an invitation. It had arrived through official channels. Attendance required. Uniform mandatory. No excuses accepted. So there I was, Captain Geneville, bomb technician, reluctant guest at a diplomatic gala, living the dream. A familiar voice drifted across the foyer. "Oh my God, Serena." Hold still. I didn't need to turn around. My mother was already fussing over my sister. I followed the sound anyway. Sure enough, Serena Adler stood beneath one of the chandeliers while my mother adjusted the shoulder of her designer gown. My father stood nearby holding her purse. Not my mother's purse, Serena's, because apparently that was his job tonight. "Take another one," Serena said. A man holding a phone snapped 3 more pictures. Serena looked at the screen. "No. The lighting makes my cheekbones look weird." My father immediately stepped closer. "Try from this side." My mother nodded. "That's much better." I watched the entire operation for about 10 seconds. Nobody noticed me. That wasn't unusual. Serena had always been the center of the room. When we were kids, teachers remembered her name first. When relatives visited, they complimented her first. When she became an interior designer, my parents talked about her projects like she had personally rebuilt the White House. Meanwhile, I spent years deployed overseas. I learned how to identify pressure plates. I learned how to clear routes. I learned how to bring people home alive. Apparently, those accomplishments were less exciting than throw pillows. Life wasn't always fair. Sometimes it wasn't even creative about it. My mother finally spotted me. "Oh good, Genevieve." No hello, no hug. Just acknowledgement. Her eyes moved across my uniform. "Stand next to your sister." I knew exactly what that meant. Photo time. I walked over anyway. Serena barely glanced at me. "You could smile." "I am smiling." "No, that's your military smile. That's because I'm military." My father chuckled like she had delivered the funniest joke of the year. I didn't bother responding. The photographer raised the phone. We stood together. One family, one happy image, one complete fiction. The flash went off 3 times. The second the photos was finished, Serena was already scrolling through them. Not one question about why I was being honored. Not one question about the event. Not one question about anything I had spent the last decade doing. She was busy checking angles. That told me everything I needed to know. The ceremony hadn't even started yet. They were already treating the evening like a networking opportunity, because that was why they came. Not for me, not for service, not for recognition, for visibility, for pictures, for status. I looked across the ballroom entrance where military officers from 3 allied nations were gathering near the stage. A few of them nodded at me. One gave me a respectful smile. Another raised a hand in greeting. Men and women who understood exactly what the uniform represented. Men and women who knew what the scars under the gloves meant. The contrast hit me harder than I expected. Sometimes strangers respected my work more than my own family ever had, and that realization never got easier. Before we head inside, I want to ask you something. Have you ever spent years proving your value, only to realize the people closest to you were too busy chasing appearances to see who you really were? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, family conflict, and the moments that reveal a person's true character, remember our exclusive stories go live every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Make us part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next premiere. A moment later, the ballroom doors opened. The crowd began moving forward, and my family rushed toward the cameras before they rushed toward their seats. I followed the movement of the crowd and stepped into the ballroom as the doors closed behind us. The room was even larger than it had looked from the foyer. Round tables stretched across the polished floor beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Uniformed service staff moved quietly between guests carrying silver trays. Small flags from both nations decorated the centerpieces. Somewhere near the stage, a string quartet was performing music that nobody seemed interested in listening to. Most people were busy looking at each other, or making sure other people were looking at them. Our assigned table sat near the center of the room. Good visibility, good access to the stage, good location for photographs, which explained why Serena looked pleased for the first time all evening. "Oh, this is perfect," she said as she lowered herself into her chair. My mother immediately pulled out her phone. "Wait, don't sit yet." Serena froze. My mother stood and moved 3 feet to the left. "No, the lighting is better from this angle." My father nodded as if she were directing a military operation. "I think you're right." I sat down. Nobody noticed, again. My mother spent the next several minutes taking photos while Serena changed poses like she was walking through a magazine shoot. Turn slides, smile, look away, look back. Fix your hair, lift your chin, repeat. The British Embassy had probably hosted generals, diplomats, intelligence chiefs, and members of parliament over the years. Tonight, one corner of it was hosting an amateur fashion campaign. The security team stationed around the ballroom watched the guests with professional calm. One of them glanced toward Serena after hearing her complain for the 3rd time. "I still can't believe they made us wait outside." My mother sighed sympathetically. The security was a little excessive. I nearly laughed. A little excessive. We were attending an event involving ambassadors, military leaders, senior government officials, and actual royalty. Of course, security was excessive. That was the entire point. Serena continued scrolling through her photos. The metal detectors took forever. "It was maybe 6 minutes," I said. She looked at me, the way people look at a stranger who unexpectedly joins a conversation. "It felt longer." I shrugged. "I've spent longer than that waiting for robots to clear suspicious packages." My father waved a hand. "That's different." Of course it was. Everything I did was different. Everything Serena did was important. That had always been the family formula. The waiter arrived with water glasses. My mother thanked him. Then she immediately returned her attention to Serena. "So, did the Ashcroft project finally get approved?" Serena brightened instantly. "Yes. Full redesign." "Oh, that's wonderful. They increased the budget." "How much?" Serena smiled. "Just over 380,000. My parents reacted like she had personally negotiated peace in the Middle East. I took a sip of water. 12 years earlier, I had learned a valuable lesson. Never compete for attention with Serena. You would lose, not because she was better, because the judges had already picked a winner. The conversation continued. Luxury furniture, imported stone, private clients, designer fabrics, names of people I had never met. My father leaned forward. "This project could really elevate your profile." Serena nodded. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Nobody asked about my work. Nobody ever did. That part no longer surprised me. What surprised me was how predictable the entire evening felt. I could have written the script myself. Then something happened that perfectly summarized my place in the family. A distinguished British official passed near our table. Gray suit, silver hair, senior enough that several people stood to greet him. My father recognized him immediately. I could see the calculation happening in real time. Opportunity detected. Target acquired. Before I could even stand to acknowledge the man, my father stepped directly in front of me. Literally in front of me, not figuratively, physically. He blocked me from view and extended his hand. "Sir, wonderful event." The official smiled politely. "Thank you." My father reached into his jacket pocket. Out came a business card. Not mine, Serena's. "My daughter is one of the finest interior designers in Washington." I closed my eyes for a second. Just 1 second. Because if I kept them open, I might actually laugh. The British official accepted the card, mostly because polite people accept things. Very nice. She specializes in luxury environments. Serena was already standing, already smiling, already performing. The official nodded again and continued walking. The entire interaction lasted maybe 20 seconds. 20 seconds was all it took. My father had attended a diplomatic military event honoring Allied service members. And his first instinct was to market Serena's business. Not even subtle, not even embarrassed, just completely natural. Like breathing, my mother beamed proudly. That was smart. Serena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You never know who might call. I looked toward the stage. It was easier. Far easier. The military section was beginning to fill. Uniforms from different branches, decorations, service ribbons, people who carried themselves with a certain quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not performance, just competence. The kind built through years of responsibility. I recognized a few faces. Some recognized me. A Navy commander raised his glass slightly. I returned the gesture. No words needed. Then I looked back at my table. My family was discussing social media engagement. The contrast was almost funny. Almost. The truth was less dramatic than people imagine. Being overlooked doesn't always feel like a knife. It doesn't always break your heart. Sometimes it becomes familiar, like an old injury that aches before rain. You stop expecting different. You stop waiting for recognition. You simply learn your place. And my place had always been clear. Serena was the main character. My parents were her supporting cast. I was useful when photographs required a complete family. Beyond that, I mostly blended into the background. The strange part was that nobody at the table seemed aware they were doing it. They weren't trying to hurt me. That would have required noticing me first. The quartet finished another piece. Conversations softened as guests began taking their seats. Near the stage, event staff adjusted microphones and prepared presentation folders. The formal program was about to begin. Around me, the energy in the ballroom slowly shifted. Most guests were preparing for an evening of speeches and diplomatic ceremony. My family was preparing for something entirely different. They were still looking for the next person who might be useful, and I was starting to realize they had no idea why this room had gathered in the first place. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the stage crew make their final adjustments. The room gradually settled into that strange quiet that happens before important events begin. Conversations became softer. Chairs stopped moving. Glasses returned to tabletops. For most people in the ballroom, the evening was finally starting. For Serena, it was apparently becoming an inconvenience. The first course had already been served and cleared away. She barely touched any of it. While everyone else listened to opening remarks from diplomats and military representatives, Serena remained focused on her phone, her watch, and whatever social emergency existed outside the embassy walls. Every few minutes, her wrist appeared above the table. Gold watch. Quick glance. Tiny frown. Repeat. The crystal glass in front of her suffered a similar fate. Tap, 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 perfectly manicured nails striking expensive crystals. A small sound. A constant sound. The kind that slowly drills into your skull. My mother leaned toward her. You okay? Serena sighed dramatically. I'm just thinking about tonight. My father looked up. The reservation? Yes, of course. The reservation. For the past week, I had heard more about that restaurant than I had heard about the event honoring Allied service members. Apparently getting a table there required connections, referrals, and enough social influence to make ordinary people feel poor. The restaurant was called Viridian House. Invite only. No public website, no direct booking line, no waiting list. The kind of place that existed primarily so wealthy people could tell other wealthy people they had been there. I never understood the appeal. Food was food. Status seemed less filling. Serena certainly disagreed. I had to call in 3 favors to get this reservation. My mother nodded sympathetically. I know. If we're late, they'll move to the next guest. My father frowned. That would be unfortunate. I nearly smiled. Unfortunate. A fascinating choice of words. In my line of work, unfortunate usually involved explosive devices, damaged vehicles, or emergency medical evacuation. Tonight, unfortunate apparently meant losing access to an overpriced cocktail. Different worlds. Same dictionary. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, a signal that the formal presentations would begin soon. Several guests straightened in their seats. Military officers turned their attention toward the stage. Near the front of the room, I spotted Major Silas Rowe standing with several senior officials. Even from a distance, he looked exactly like himself. Calm, professional, unimpressed by ceremony. He caught sight of me and gave a brief nod. I returned it. That was all. No performance, no speeches, no unnecessary attention, just mutual respect. The kind built over years. My mother suddenly touched Serena's arm. Your hair moved. Serena immediately checked her reflection in her phone camera. My father leaned closer. Everything looks fine. I don't know, Serena said. The humidity in here is weird. I stared at my water glass. Sometimes silence was the safest response available. A server appeared and refilled several drinks. As he worked, Serena checked her watch again, then less than a minute later again. The man sitting beside me noticed. A retired British brigadier, whose name I had unfortunately forgotten, smiled politely. Running late for something. Before I could answer, Serena answered for herself. We have a reservation across town. The brigadier nodded. After the ceremony, Serena hesitated. Hopefully, before the end. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Not enough to be rude, just enough to reveal surprise. Oh, that single word carried an entire conversation inside it. Thankfully, he was too polite to continue. The keynote portion of the evening was about to begin. Event staff moved toward their assigned positions. The large screens beside the stage illuminated. Guests turned forward. The atmosphere shifted again. The social gathering was ending. The reason everyone had come was beginning, except my family seemed completely disconnected from the change. My mother checked Serena's schedule. My father checked traffic updates. Serena checked her watch. Again. The first keynote speaker approached the podium. Applause spread through the ballroom. The speaker began discussing cooperation between allied nations, security partnerships, joint operations, shared sacrifice, important subjects, meaningful subjects. Subjects Serena ignored entirely. 5 minutes later, she leaned toward my mother. 10:30. My mother looked down at her own watch. A small crease formed between her eyebrows. Not concern about the ceremony, concern about timing. I felt something settle quietly in my chest. Not anger, not surprise, just recognition. The kind that comes when reality finally stops pretending to be something else. The speaker concluded. Applause followed. Another presenter took the stage. This was the segment everyone in uniform had been waiting for. The Allied Honors presentation. Several military guests sat a little straighter. Conversations vanished completely. A respectful stillness spread through the room. Then Serena leaned closer to my mother and whispered, unfortunately, not quietly, we need to leave in 10 minutes or they'll give our table to someone else. I stared forward. Surely my mother would tell her no. Surely even she understood the difference between a dinner reservation and a military honors ceremony. My mother checked her watch. Then she nodded, actually nodded. I know. For a second, I wondered if I had misunderstood. Then my father reached down beside his chair. He picked up his suit jacket, folded it over one arm, prepared to leave. The realization arrived with almost no emotion attached to it. That was the strange part. A younger version of me would have felt devastated. A younger version of me would have felt angry. At 33, I mostly felt tired. Tired because this wasn't new. Tired because it made perfect sense. Tired because deep down I had always known how this would play out. My family wasn't preparing to leave during some boring speech. They weren't escaping a tedious fundraiser. They were preparing to walk out during a ceremony honoring military service. My service. 12 years. Multiple deployments. Operations nobody would ever read about. People brought home alive. People who made it back to their families. And sitting across from me were 3 people who honestly believed a restaurant reservation carried more weight than any of it. The speaker on stage introduced the next segment. The audience applauded. My father quietly adjusted his jacket. My mother gathered her purse. Serena smiled with visible relief. As far as they were concerned, the important part of their evening was about to begin, and they still had absolutely no idea what was about to happen in this room. I kept my eyes on the stage while my father folded his jacket over his arm. The movement caught the corner of my vision, but I didn't look at him. I didn't want to. The ballroom had become remarkably quiet. Not the kind of silence created by discomfort, the kind created by respect. More than 400 people sat facing the stage. Ambassadors, senior military officers, government officials, foreign dignitaries. People who understood exactly why they were there. The ambassador stepped to the podium. His polished shoes echoed softly against the wooden platform. Then even that sound disappeared. Rooms settled into complete stillness. He adjusted the microphone, looked across the audience, and began speaking. Tonight, we honor a singular act of courage that preserved the lives of 12 British Special Air Service operators in the Sirius Basin. Everything around me seemed to pause. The crystal chandeliers, the silverware, the distant hum of conversation from the outer corridors. Gone, just his voice, and the words, 12 British Special Air Service operators. My chest tightened slightly, not from anxiety, from memory. I closed my eyes. The embassy disappeared. The ballroom disappeared. Washington disappeared. In its place came something far more familiar: heat, dust, the smell of burned explosives lingering in the air, the taste of grit against my teeth, the feeling of sweat running into my eyes beneath protective gear. The Syrian basin wasn't beautiful. Nobody who had actually been there would describe it that way. It was harsh, dry, unforgiving, the kind of place that punished mistakes immediately. And on that particular day, there had been no room for mistakes. Not even one. The mission itself had seemed routine at first. Most dangerous situations begin that way. The radio traffic had been calm. The route had already been partially cleared. The British team was moving through a narrow stretch of terrain between abandoned structures. Then everything stopped. One operator noticed disturbed soil. Another spotted wiring. Within minutes, 12 men found themselves trapped. Not surrounded by enemies, surrounded by uncertainty. Sometimes uncertainty is worse. At least you can fight an enemy you can see. The devices hidden beneath that ground was something else entirely. Complicated, deliberate, built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The kind of explosive that punished impatience. The kind that waited for confidence. I remember arriving at the site. I remember kneeling beside the exposed wiring. I remember seeing enough of the device to realize how bad the situation actually was. Nobody said much. Professionals rarely do. One of the SS operators simply looked at me and asked a question. Can you get us out? Simple. Direct. No drama, no speeches. Just a man asking another human being whether 12 families were going to receive terrible phone calls. I remember answering, that's the plan. Then I got to work. 40 minutes. That was the official timeline recorded afterward. 40 minutes. It felt much longer. Time behaves strangely when every movement matters. You stop measuring minutes. You start measuring actions. One wire, one connector, one exposed section, one decision. Then another. And another. I remember lying flat against the dirt. I remember my shoulders cramping. I remember feeling sweat drip from my forehead despite the dry air. I remember forcing my breathing to stay steady, not because I was fearless, because panic would have made me useless. The pressure plate buried beneath the soil had been connected to a secondary trigger system, then a tertiary backup. Whoever designed it wanted redundancy. They wanted someone like me to make a mistake. They almost got their wish. At one point, my right hand slipped slightly while clearing debris. Nothing dramatic happened. No explosion. No movie scene. Just a brief moment where 12 armed professionals became completely motionless. The memory still makes my stomach tighten, because I knew exactly how close things had come. Eventually, the final connection came free. One small movement, barely visible. Then silence, safe silence. The best kind. I remember looking up. One of the operators laughed first. Another sat down right where he was. A third simply closed his eyes for a second. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cheered. We were all too exhausted. The mission continued. The report got filed. The world kept moving. That's usually how it works. The people involved remember. Everyone else forgets. The ambassador's voice pulled me back into the ballroom. He was reading from the official citation now. Every word had been carefully written. Every sentence reviewed and approved. Formal language, precise language. language designed to become part of the historical record. I opened my eyes, the Mzimsili returned, the chandeliers, the audience, the stage. Near the front, Major Silas Rowe stood at attention. His expression never changed, it rarely did. I had served under him long enough to know what respect looked like. This was it, not emotional, not theatrical, steady, solid, the kind of respect earned through competence. The kind that cannot be faked. The ambassador continued reading, demonstrating extraordinary technical mastery under conditions of extreme danger. The room remained silent. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. Except at my table, a chair shifted. Barely. My mother, another chair moved, my father. Then Serena glanced at her watch again. I felt it before I saw it. The same way you feel a storm arriving before the first drop of rain. They were preparing to leave. Actually preparing. Not joking. Not considering it. Doing it. The ambassador turned a page. The citation was reaching its conclusion. The room seemed to grow even quieter. Every person present understood they were witnessing something important. Every person except 3. My father adjusted his grip on the jacket. My mother gathered her purse beneath the table. Serena picked up her designer clutch. I stared forward. The strange thing was that I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires expectation. By that moment, I had none left. Only clarity. A clean, cold understanding of exactly where I stood in their priorities. The ambassador looked up from the citation. His voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. The next sentence would contain my name. The next sentence would explain why this entire evening existed. The next sentence would reveal the truth my family had ignored for years. And at that exact moment, Serena pushed her chair backward and began to stand. The scrape of Serena's chair against the floor sounded far louder than it should have. "We're going to hit traffic," she hissed, not whispered. Not quietly enough to respect the room, just loudly enough for my parents to hear. She grabbed her designer clutch from the table. My mother immediately stood with her. A quick adjustment to her dress. A glance toward the ballroom entrance. A look at her watch. She was already mentally leaving. My father rose next, suit jacket over one arm, phone in his hand, checking directions, no doubt. The ambassador was still speaking. The citation was still being read. 400 people remained seated. My family stood alone. For a brief moment, I thought one of them might finally realize what was happening. Maybe my father would notice the military officers sitting at attention. Maybe my mother would recognize the significance of the moment. Maybe Serena would understand that the world did not revolve around her dinner plans for one evening. Nobody did. Not one of them. The most painful part wasn't that they wanted to leave. It was that none of them even looked at me. No apology, no explanation, no hesitation. They simply turned their backs. Then they started walking. The main center aisle stretched from our table to the enormous mahogany doors at the rear of the ballroom. There were side exits available. Several of them. Normal people would have used those. My family chose the center aisle. Of course they did. They always preferred the route that guaranteed visibility. The ambassador continued reading, demonstrating extraordinary courage under conditions of exceptional danger. Their footsteps echoed softly across the marble. Click, click, click. Serena's heels, my mother's shoes, my father's dress shoes. The sound traveled through the otherwise silent room. People noticed, heads turned. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. One elderly British officer frowned openly. My family remained completely unaware, or perhaps they simply didn't care. I watched them move farther away, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. 3 figures walking away from the very reason they had been invited. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. I would have expected anger, humiliation, something dramatic. Instead, I felt a familiar exhaustion, the kind that comes when reality finally removes its mask. There was no confusion anymore, no lingering hope, no possibility that I had misunderstood my place in the family. The evidence was currently crossing the ballroom. The ambassador turned another page. His voice remained calm and steady, professional, measured, listened. Every word mattered, because every word represented real lives, real sacrifice, real consequences. Military decorations aren't participation trophies. Nobody receives them because they attended meetings. Nobody earns them through networking. Somebody pays a price. Always. Sometimes the price is visible, sometimes it isn't. I glanced toward Major Silas Rowe. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. He stood near the stage, eyes forward. A soldier respecting another soldier. Nothing more complicated than that. The simplicity of it struck me. Respect shouldn't be difficult. Yet somehow my family had spent decades making it impossible. The ambassador reached the final section of the citation. I knew because I had read it months earlier during the review process. I remembered every sentence, every detail, every carefully chosen word. The official record of a day I had spent trying very hard not to get 12 men killed. My family was now halfway down the aisle. Serena leaned toward my mother while walking. They were talking, actually talking. During the citation, I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Whatever conversation they were having had already been judged more important than the ceremony. The ambassador looked up from the page. The room became even quieter, if that was possible. The final sentence had arrived. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anticipation, not pride, something closer to grief, because I knew exactly what was about to happen. And I knew exactly who would miss it. The ambassador spoke. For unparalleled valor and technical mastery under extreme duress. The words echoed across the ballroom. My family continued walking. The conspicuous gallantry cross, another step, almost to the doors, is awarded to, I stared at their backs. 3 people who had known me my entire life. 3 people who had never bothered to learn who I actually was. The ambassador finished the sentence. Captain Genevieve Adler. My name hung in the air. For a split second, nothing moved. Then the applause began. Not explosive, not yet. It started as a wave, one pair of hands, then another, then another. Military officers rose first. Several diplomats followed. The sound grew rapidly, building across the ballroom, respect spreading from table to table, recognition spreading from person to person. My name had finally been spoken, officially, publicly, unmistakably. And my family didn't stop. That was the part I remember most. Not the applause, not the award, not even the citation. They didn't stop. Most people would have frozen, turned around, realized their mistake. My family kept walking. Serena was already reaching for the door handle. My father glanced toward the exit. My mother adjusted her purse strap, completely committed to leaving, completely committed to missing it. The applause continued growing. Several guests stood. Then more stood. The energy in the room changed. People understood the significance of the award. People understood what had happened in Syria. People understood the cost behind those words. The 3 people who should have understood most remained focused on dinner. I slowly pushed my chair back. The movement felt strangely distant, like I was watching someone else do it. The applause rolled across the ballroom in powerful waves now. A recognition larger than me, larger than one mission, larger than one ceremony. I rose to my feet. The white gloves caught the light from the chandeliers. For a brief second, I looked down at them, at the hands hidden beneath, the scars, the burns, the years. Everything that had brought me here. Then I looked toward the stage. The ambassador was waiting. Major Rowe remained at attention. The room was standing. My family was almost through the doors. And somehow, despite all the applause surrounding me, the only thing I could hear was the sound of those footsteps leaving my life behind. I stepped away from the table and into the aisle. The applause continued around me. Hundreds of people standing, hundreds of people clapping. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom, yet somehow I felt detached from it. Not proud, not triumphant, not even embarrassed, just numb. The kind of numbness that settles in after something finally confirms what you've known for years. My family was leaving. That fact no longer hurt, it simply existed. Like gravity, like weather, like any other reality that doesn't care whether you accept it. I took one step toward the stage. The ambassador was waiting. The award presentations was supposed to continue. Everything was moving exactly as protocol demanded. Then the room changed. It happened so fast that at first I thought I imagined it. The applause stopped. Not gradually, not naturally. Stopped. 1 second the ballroom was full of sound. The next second it was gone. Complete silence. Absolute silence. Then came a noise every military service member recognizes instantly. Boots. 100 pairs of them, striking the floor in perfect unison. The sharp crack of soldiers snapping to attention. The sound hit the room like a physical force. Across the ballroom, officers rose straighter. Hands moved to their side, chins lifted, eyes forward. The transformation was immediate, professional, instinctive. Years of training condensed into a single moment. The sudden silence felt enormous, almost intimidating. Even civilians could sense it. Conversations died instantly. No one moved. No one spoke. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to something far more serious. I stopped walking. Everyone stopped walking, including my family. Only a few feet from the giant mahogany exit doors, Serena froze. My mother turned around first. Confusion spread across her face. My father looked irritated, the kind of irritation people feel when something delays their plans. For several seconds, they simply stood there, waiting, trying to understand why nobody else was moving, why nobody was leaving, why the room had suddenly become so still. Then Serena turned completely around. I watched the exact moment her expression changed. Not fear, not yet, just confusion. She looked toward the stage. The ambassador wasn't speaking. Major Rowe wasn't moving. Neither was anyone else. The focus of the room wasn't on me anymore. It was somewhere else. My family followed the line of everyone's attention, toward the front of the ballroom, toward the elevated section reserved for distinguished guests, toward the royal box, and finally they saw it. The guest of honor had risen. The King of England was standing. Even from halfway across the room, his presence altered everything. Not because he demanded attention, because protocol demanded attention. There is a difference. People often misunderstand power. The loudest person rarely has it. The person everyone automatically obeys usually does. The king's rise had triggered an entire chain reaction. Military officers responded. Diplomatic staff responded. Government officials responded. 400 people adjusted themselves around a single movement. And now my family was trapped in the middle of it. They couldn't continue walking, not without drawing every eye in the room, not without violating every social expectation governing the event. For the first time all evening, they had nowhere to go. The realization appeared slowly. My father's posture stiffened. My mother lowered her purse. Serena tightened her grip on her clutch. Nobody looked comfortable anymore. Good. Not because I wanted revenge, because reality had finally entered the conversation. The king stepped away from his seat. A military aide moved instinctively nearby. The king gave a slight gesture. The aide stopped. The room remained silent. The only sounds came from distant ventilation and the faint clink of glass somewhere near the back. I glanced toward Major Rowe. His expression hadn't changed, but I noticed something in his eyes, not surprise. Recognition, as though he already understood exactly what was about to happen. The king descended from the platform, one step, then another. No rush, no theatrics, no attempt to create a dramatic moment, which somehow made it more dramatic. Everyone watched. Every diplomat, every officer, every guest. The king began walking down the central aisle, the same aisle my family had chosen as their personal exit route less than a minute earlier. Now they stood frozen inside it, unable to leave, forced to wait, forced to witness. Serena shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all evening, she wasn't the center of attention. For the first time all evening, attention belonged to something she couldn't control. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the universe occasionally possesses a cruel sense of timing. The king continued forward. The ballroom remained perfectly silent. I could feel hundreds of eyes moving between him and me, and suddenly I understood something. This wasn't about the medal anymore. The medal mattered, the citation mattered. But something larger had taken over. Respect. Not the performative version people post online, not the version attached to status or wealth. The real version. The kind that exists regardless of whether cameras are present. The kind earned when nobody is watching. The kind built over years. The king moved closer, 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. My family remained motionless near the doors. Their restaurant reservation had vanished from their minds. Their social plans no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except the unfolding moment they had nearly walked away from. The room waited. The king approached. And for the first time all night, my parents and Serena were finally paying attention. The king continued down the aisle without hesitation. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. 400 people stood, frozen inside a silence so complete that I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as guests adjusted their posture. The ballroom had become something entirely different from the glamorous social event Serena had imagined when she picked out her dress. This was no longer a networking opportunity, no longer a diplomatic dinner, no longer a room full of important people trying to impress one another. It had become a room focused on a single act of service, a single moment, a single truth. And there was no escaping it, especially not for my family. Near the exit doors, Serena stood motionless. Her fingers remained wrapped around her designer clutch. My mother still held her purse. My father still carried his folded jacket. All three looked like people who had stepped onto the wrong stage and suddenly realized the audience was watching. For once, nobody was looking at Serena. Nobody cared about her business cards. Nobody cared about social media photographs. Nobody cared about reservations. The entire room had shifted toward something infinitely larger. The king walked past table after table. Ambassadors stood respectfully. Generals stood respectfully. Decorated veterans stood respectfully. The protocol was absolute. When the king stood, everyone stood. When the king moved, nobody interrupted. When the king chose a destination, the room simply accepted it. And the destination was me. I felt strangely calm, maybe because the evening had already stripped away every illusion. Maybe because, after watching my family walk out during my citation, there was nothing left to fear. Or maybe because military service teaches you something important. Once you've spent enough time in genuinely dangerous situations, public attention stops feeling threatening. Uncomfortable? Absolutely, but not threatening. The king continued forward, 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet. Then he stopped, directly in front of me. The distance between us was small enough that I could clearly see the details most people never notice. The faint lines around his eyes, the controlled posture, the practiced discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime performing public duties. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ballroom remained silent. I became aware of my own hands. White gloves covering old scars. Scars nobody at my family table had ever asked about. Scars earned one careless movement at a time. A burn here, a cut there. Tiny reminders of jobs completed successfully. The king's gaze lowered briefly. Toward my hands, not the medal waiting on the stage, not the uniform, not the decorations, the hands. Then he looked back up, directly into my eyes. People often imagine powerful individuals speak differently, louder, more dramatically. The reality is usually the opposite. The truly powerful rarely need volume. When the king finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. Every word landed perfectly inside the silence. You brought my men home to their families. Captain Adler. The sentence traveled through the ballroom. No microphone needed, no repetition necessary. I felt something tighten unexpectedly in my chest, not because of the praise, because of the wording. Not bravery, not heroism, not sacrifice, families. That was the part that mattered. I thought about the 12 operators standing in that minefield years earlier. I thought about the relief on their faces afterward. I thought about the wives, husbands, parents, children, and friends who never received terrible phone calls because things had gone right that day. The king continued, "My nation owes you a debt we cannot repay." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. At least that's how it felt. The room seemed suspended between 1 second and the next, and then something happened that I will remember for the rest of my life. The king lowered his head slightly, just enough to be unmistakable. Not a dramatic gesture. Not a theatrical performance, simple acknowledgement, one professional recognizing another, one human being recognizing service. Then he raised his hand and gave me a salute, a crisp, perfect military salute. For a brief second, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Not because I didn't understand the gesture, because I understood it completely. Every service member does. A salute is simple, but it means something. Respect, recognition, trust, gratitude, all communicated without a single extra word. I returned it immediately. Training took over before emotion could. My hand rose smoothly, my posture straightened, our eyes remained locked. The salute lasted only a moment. Yet somehow it felt larger than the award itself, larger than the ceremony, larger than the embassy. Because the gesture wasn't about rank, it wasn't about politics, it wasn't about diplomacy, it was about respect, pure and uncomplicated. Something my family had spent years withholding, something a king had given freely. Out of the corner of my eye, I finally saw them, my parents, Serena, still trapped beside the doors, still standing exactly where they had intended to abandon the evening. Their expressions had changed completely. Serena looked pale, not embarrassed, stunned. The kind of stunned that arrives when reality refuses to cooperate with your assumptions. My mother stared at me as though she were seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. My father's face had lost every trace of confidence. The man who spent the evening promoting Serena's career suddenly looked very small. And none of them could leave. That was the beautiful part. Not because they were being punished. Because they were finally forced to witness. No distractions, no escape route, no dinner reservation, no social opportunity, no convenient excuse. Just truth. Standing in front of them. The king lowered his hand. I lowered mine. The silence lasted one final heartbeat, then the ballroom erupted. The applause that followed wasn't polite applause, it wasn't diplomatic applause. It wasn't the kind people offer because protocol requires it. It hit the room like a wave. Loud, powerful, unrestrained, 400 people rising together in recognition. The sound rolled across the ballroom and crashed against the walls. And through it all, my family remained frozen near the exit doors, forced to stand still and watch the moment they had tried so desperately to leave behind. The applause crashed through the ballroom like a tidal wave. Not polite, not ceremonial, not the restrained applause people offer because etiquette demands it. This was different. 400 people stood on their feet, military officers, ambassadors, diplomats, decorated veterans, foreign dignitaries. The sound rolled across the room with a force I could feel in my chest. I held the salute for a moment longer. Then I lowered my hand. My posture remained straight. My chin stayed high. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Because for the first time all evening, I wasn't trying to disappear. The king offered a small nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Then he stepped aside so the formal presentation could continue. Protocol returned. The ceremony moved forward, but something fundamental had changed. The room no longer saw a quiet EOD technician standing in the aisle. The room saw exactly what I had spent 12 years becoming. And over the king's shoulder, I saw my family. Serena looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. The color had drained from her face completely. The woman who could spend 20 minutes choosing the perfect angle for a photograph suddenly looked incapable of forming a single sentence. My mother's mouth was slightly open, not because she was emotional, because she was shocked, truly shocked. The kind of shock that arrives when reality destroys a belief you've carried for years. For most of her life, she had treated Serena's social world as the center of the universe. She had spent years assuming that prestige came from appearances, from money, from connections, from being seen in the right places with the right people. Now she had just watched a king cross an entire ballroom to honor the daughter she had nearly abandoned for a dinner reservation. That realization hit harder than any argument ever could. My father wasn't looking at me. He was looking around the room, watching everyone else's reaction, watching generals applaud, watching diplomats rise to their feet, watching foreign officials approach the stage, watching 400 influential people show respect to someone he had spent years treating like an afterthought. His expression reminded me of someone checking a map and realizing he had been driving in the wrong direction for decades. The formal presentation concluded a few minutes later. I received the medal. Photographs were taken, hands were shaken. Several British officers approached to offer congratulations. One of the SAS operators from the incident was there. I hadn't seen him in years. His hair had more gray in it now. Mine probably did too. He smiled. "Good to see you again, Captain." "Good to see you too." He extended his hand. I shook it. Simple. Professional. Real. No performance required. Another officer stepped forward. Then, another. Conversations followed. Stories, memories, respect. The evening finally felt honest. Then I noticed movement near the back of the ballroom. My family. They were coming toward me. Quickly. Very quickly. The transformation would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. A few minutes earlier, they couldn't leave fast enough. Now they were practically jogging. My mother arrived first. A wide smile stretched across her face. Far too wide. The smile people wear when they are desperately trying to recover from a mistake. Genevieve. My father appeared beside her. That was incredible. Serena joined them seconds later. Suddenly, everyone wanted proximity. Everyone wanted conversation. Everyone wanted connection. Amazing how quickly priorities can change when 400 witnesses are involved. My mother touched my arm. We had no idea. There it was, the sentence, the universal emergency response of people who ignored something for years. We had no idea. I believed her. That was the sad part. They genuinely didn't know. Not because the information was hidden, because they had never bothered to ask. You cannot understand someone whose story you refuse to hear. My father laughed nervously. You should have told us. I almost smiled. Told them what? About deployments? About bomb disposal? About military operations? I had. Many times. They just weren't listening. The difference tonight was that a king had said it. Suddenly, the exact same information carried value. Serena looked at the medal, then back at me. Her voice was unusually soft. You never said it was that serious. Again. Not malicious. just revealing. The assumption behind the statements explained everything. They believed the job was ordinary because they had decided it was ordinary. No amount of explanation could compete with a belief someone wanted to keep, until reality forced a correction. Major Rowe approached from my left. Several Allied officers joined him. We were heading toward a private reception area for honorees. The evening wasn't over yet. My family clearly wanted to come along, to participate, to reclaim ownership of a moment they had nearly abandoned. I looked at them, really looked at them, not with anger, not with bitterness, just clarity. For years I had imagined some dramatic confrontation, a speech, an argument, a list of grievances. Life rarely works that way. Most truths don't require speeches, they simply arrive. And once they arrive, everybody recognizes them. My mother started to say something else. I never found out what. Because I gently stepped around her, then around my father, then around Serena. I stopped for 1 second, just long enough to meet their eyes, just long enough to leave them with something they would remember. Enjoy your dinner. That was it. No yelling, no accusations, no revenge speech. Nothing else needed to be said. I walked away with Major Rowe and the others. Behind me, nobody followed. Hours later, the embassy was quiet. The ceremony was over. The guests had gone home. Washington had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. I found myself sitting alone on a bench near the Lincoln Memorial. The city lights reflected softly across the water. The medal rested in my hands, heavy, cool, real. For a while I simply sat there, thinking, not about my family, not about the king, not even about the award. I thought about dignity. People spend years chasing it from the wrong places. Parents, friends, coworkers, strangers. They beg for approval. They negotiate for respect. They shrink themselves, hoping someone will finally recognize their worth. The truth is simpler. Dignity is not something another person gives you, and it is not something they can take away. Real dignity begins the moment you stop asking permission to matter. The moment you understand your value doesn't depend on who applauds, or who leaves, or who stays. I looked down at the medal one last time, then out across the quiet city. Some people need you to remain small because your growth exposes their blindness. That isn't your burden to carry. The most peaceful victory isn't proving them wrong. It's outgrowing the need for them to be right, and having enough grace to let them walk away. Just as they once tried to walk away from you. A few weeks after the ceremony, people kept asking me the same question. They wanted to know what it felt like. Not the medal, not the embassy, not even meeting the king. They wanted to know what it felt like watching my own family walk away during one of the most important moments of my life. The honest answer usually surprised them. It didn't feel like betrayal. Not exactly. Betrayal requires trust, and by that point, I had spent enough years understanding my family to know exactly who they were. What hurt wasn't what happened that night. What hurt was realizing how long I had been waiting for something that was never coming. For years, I believed that if I worked harder, achieved more, sacrificed more, or proved myself enough times, eventually my family would look at me differently. I thought there was some invisible finish line, some achievement that would finally earn their respect. A promotion, a deployment, a medal, something, anything. But life taught me a lesson I wish someone had taught me much sooner. You cannot earn appreciation from people who are using the wrong measuring stick. My family wasn't evaluating me based on character. They weren't evaluating me based on service. They weren't evaluating me based on responsibility, sacrifice, or integrity. They were evaluating everyone based on visibility. Who looked successful? Who sounded impressive? Who attracted attention? And when that's the measuring system, some of the most valuable people in the world will always lose. Think about it. The nurse working a 12-hour shift. The mechanic keeping emergency vehicles running. The teacher spending her own money on classroom supplies. The military service member deployed far from home. The father working overtime to keep the lights on. The mother holding a family together while nobody notices. These people rarely make headlines. They rarely get standing ovations. Yet, society falls apart without them. The older I get, the more I realize that many families create roles without meaning to. There's often a golden child, the one who receives the attention, the praise, the excitement. Then there's someone else, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one everybody depends on but rarely celebrates. The dangerous part is that these roles can become so normal that nobody questions them anymore. Not even the people being hurt by them. I certainly didn't. For a long time, I accepted my role. I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was tougher than that I didn't need recognition, that I didn't care. Some of that was true, some of it wasn't, because every human being wants to feel seen. Every human being wants to believe that the people closest to them understand who they are. There is nothing weak about that desire. The mistake happens when we build our self-worth around it. One of the biggest lessons I learned from that night is that achievement cannot heal emotional hunger. People think success solves everything. It doesn't. You can earn medals, build businesses, make money, win awards, reach goals, and still find yourself wanting approval from someone who refuses to give it. Success changes your circumstances. It doesn't automatically heal old wounds. That healing begins when you stop placing your value in someone else's hands. I wish I had understood that sooner. I wish someone had told me that respect and recognition are not the same thing. A person can recognize your success without respecting you. A person can praise your accomplishments while still failing to appreciate your character. Real respect runs deeper. It shows up in how people treat you when there is nothing to gain. It shows up in the conversations they have when you aren't in the room. It shows up in whether they listen when you speak. It shows up in whether they make space for your life, your experiences, and your perspective. The king recognized my service that evening. But what moved me most wasn't the recognition. It was the respect. There is a difference, a very important difference. If you're watching this and you've spent years feeling invisible inside your own family, I want you to hear something clearly. You do not need to win some giant victory to prove your worth. You do not need a public moment. You do not need applause. You do not need somebody powerful to validate your existence. Your value does not begin when other people finally notice it. Your value existed before they noticed, and it will continue to exist even if they never do. That lesson changed my life, not because it made me angry, not because it made me cut people off, because it made me free. The day you stop chasing validation is the day you stop giving other people control over your peace. And peace is worth far more than approval. Looking back now, I don't think the most important thing that happened in that ballroom was the award. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't even the salute. The most important thing was the realization that I no longer needed my family's permission to feel proud of the person I had become. That realization stayed with me long after the ceremony ended. And if there's one thing I wish someone had told me years earlier, it's this. The strongest adults aren't always the most celebrated. They're the ones who keep moving forward, even when nobody is cheering. Because they finally understand that their worth was never up for a vote. The strange thing is that my life didn't suddenly become perfect after that night. A lot of people imagine stories ending with some magical transformation. The family finally understands, everyone apologizes, old wounds disappear, the credits roll. Real life is usually less dramatic. And honestly, the weeks after a fair ceremony were surprisingly normal. I went back to work, I went back to training. I went back to reports, briefings, inspections, and all the ordinary responsibilities that make up military life. Bombs didn't suddenly become less dangerous because I received a medal. Deadlines didn't disappear, life kept moving. What changed wasn't my job. What changed was me. For years, I had spent an enormous amount of energy trying to explain myself to people who had already decided not to listen. I didn't realize how exhausting that was until I stopped doing it. Maybe some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You explain your choices, you explain your career, you explain your priorities, you explain why something matters to you. Then a week later, you're explaining the exact same thing again because nobody was paying attention the first time. Eventually, you start wondering whether you're the problem. Maybe you're not communicating clearly enough. Maybe you're expecting too much. Maybe you're being unreasonable. I used to think that. Then one day I realized something simple. People who genuinely care about understanding you usually make an effort to understand you. People who don't care usually don't. That realization saved me years of frustration. One of the most common messages I receive now comes from people who feel invisible inside their own families. And what's interesting is that their jobs are often very different. Some are military, some are nurses, some drive trucks, some work construction, some teach school, some repair equipment, some work night shifts while everyone else sleeps. Many of them tell the same story. The flashy sibling gets attention, the loud sibling gets attention, the successful sibling gets attention, Meanwhile, the dependable sibling quietly keeps everything running and barely gets noticed. I understand that feeling, probably more than I wish I did. But here's what I learned. Being useful and being appreciated are not the same thing. A lot of people spend their entire lives confusing the two. Your family might depend on you. Your workplace might depend on you. Your friends might depend on you. That doesn't automatically mean they appreciate you. Appreciation requires awareness. It requires gratitude. It requires recognition. And unfortunately, some people become so accustomed to your reliability that they stop seeing it altogether. You become part of the furniture, not because you're unimportant, because you're always there. Think about electricity. Most people don't appreciate electricity until the power goes out. Then suddenly, everyone notices what was quietly supporting their life the entire time. Many responsible people live exactly like that. Always available, always dependable, always solving problems, and almost completely overlooked. One lesson that changed my relationships forever was learning to pay attention to actions instead of words. Words are easy. Words cost nothing. Actions require investment. Anybody can say they love you. Anybody can say they support you. Anybody can say they're proud of you. The better question is this: how do they treat you when nobody is watching? Do they listen when you speak? Do they remember things that matter to you? Do they show up when you need them? Do they make room for your accomplishments, or only their own? Those questions reveal far more than speeches ever will. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. I simply didn't want to see them. Not because I was naive, because I was hopeful. Hope is a beautiful thing, but hope becomes dangerous when it prevents you from accepting reality. One of the healthiest decisions I ever made was stopping my habit of chasing approval. Not because approval is bad. Everyone enjoys encouragement. Everyone likes appreciation. The problem begins when your self-worth depends on it. That's a dangerous arrangement, because the moment someone controls your validation, they control your peace. And peace is too valuable to hand over to anybody else. I remember sitting with Major Rowe several months after the ceremony. We were reviewing training schedules when he asked me a question. "How's your family?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was complicated. He nodded immediately. He understood. People who have lived long enough usually do. Then he said something I've never forgotten. "Don't build your opinion of yourself using borrowed materials." That sentence stuck with me, because that's exactly what many of us do. We build our confidence using other people's opinions, other people's approval, other people's praise, other people's expectations. The problem is that borrowed materials don't belong to us. The moment someone takes them back, everything collapses. Real confidence has to be built differently. It has to come from your values, your effort, your integrity, your character, the things nobody can take away. These days, my life is much quieter, not because people suddenly changed. Because I changed. I stopped trying to convince everyone to see my worth. I stopped arguing for my value. I stopped auditioning for acceptance, and something surprising happened. The less I chased validation, the more peaceful I became. Not perfect. Not immune to disappointment, just peaceful. Because adulthood isn't learning how to make everyone appreciate you. Adulthood is learning how to remain secure, even when some people never will. And that lesson turned out to be worth far more than any medal I ever received. As I sit here thinking about everything that happened, I realize something. Most people watching this story will never stand in a ballroom filled with ambassadors. Most people will never receive a medal from a foreign government. Most people will never have a king walk across a room and salute them. And honestly, that's not the point. Because the real lesson was never about the ceremony. It was never about the award. It was never about royalty. The real lesson is about something much more common. Something millions of people experience every single day: feeling invisible. If you've watched this entire story, there's a good chance you've felt that way at some point in your life. Maybe it happened in your family. Maybe it happened at work. Maybe it happened in a relationship. Maybe you're living through it right now. You're the person everyone depends on. The person who solves problems, the person who shows up, the person who keeps promises, the person who does what needs to be done. And somehow you're also the person people overlook. I've learned that being overlooked creates a very specific kind of loneliness. Not because you're physically alone, because you're surrounded by people who only see part of you. They see what you provide, they see what you contribute, but they don't really see you. That feeling can follow someone for years, sometimes decades. And if we're not careful, we start believing the story other people tell about us. We start believing we're ordinary, replaceable, unimportant. We start shrinking ourselves to fit inside other people's expectations. That's where the real danger begins. Not when someone underestimates you, when you start agreeing with them. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. The people around you are not always qualified to judge your value. Read that again. Just because someone knows you does not mean they understand you. Just because someone raised you does not mean they see you clearly. Just because someone loves you does not mean they recognize your worth. Human beings are imperfect. We all have blind spots. We all make assumptions. We all miss things. Some parents miss things. Some spouses miss things. Some friends miss things. And sometimes the person they miss is standing right in front of them, you. One of the hardest truths in adulthood is accepting that some people may never fully understand who you are. Not because you're difficult to understand, because they have already decided who they think you are. Changing that picture can be nearly impossible. The good news is that you don't actually need to. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need everyone to approve of you. You don't need everyone to validate your choices. What you need is something much simpler. You need to be able to look at yourself honestly. You need to know whether you're living according to your values. You need to know whether you're treating people well. You need to know whether you're building a life you can respect. Everything else is secondary. One thing I've noticed over the years is that many people spend their entire lives waiting for a moment that may never come. The promotion, the award, the apology, the recognition. The family member who finally admits they were wrong. The friend who suddenly appreciates everything you've done. The partner who finally notices your sacrifices. Sometimes those moments happen. Sometimes they don't. Life doesn't guarantee them. What life does guarantee is this: you still have to live tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. You cannot put your happiness on hold while waiting for someone else to catch up. You cannot spend 20 years standing at an emotional bus stop, waiting for a vehicle that isn't coming. At some point, you have to continue your journey, whether they join you or not. That isn't bitterness. That isn't revenge. That's maturity. The older I get, the more I believe that dignity is one of the most valuable things a person can possess. Not pride, not ego, dignity. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are. The calm strength that comes from respecting yourself. The ability to walk away from situations that require you to become smaller just to make other people comfortable. That's what I learned from everything that happened. Not how to win, not how to prove people wrong, how to stop needing to. Because once you stop needing validation, something remarkable happens. You become free. Free to grow, free to change, free to succeed, free to fail. Free to live your life according to your own values instead of somebody else's expectations. And that's the message I want to leave you with today. If you've spent years feeling unseen, don't let that convince you that you're insignificant. If you've spent years feeling overlooked, don't let that convince you that you're unworthy. And if you've spent years carrying responsibilities that nobody seems to notice, please remember this. Your value does not decrease simply because someone else failed to recognize it. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own experiences, or if it helped you see your own situation a little differently, I'd love to have you join our community. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and become part of what we're building here. Every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET, we share stories that go beyond family drama, stories about dignity, character, resilience, respect, and the lessons that help us navigate real life. Until the next story, take care of yourself, and never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on their ability to see it.